So you've decided to manage your own rental property. While that can save you some money, it can also become another job and a big hassle if you're not careful. But there are landlords who figured out how to self-manage their own rentals using technology, systems, and a team that actually increase their personal freedom. Today, I'm interviewing two of those landlords who are going to share their secrets with you in this episode, and we're getting started right now. Welcome to the podcast, Real Estate Investing with Coach Carson. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach Carson, and this is a show to help you get out of the financial grind so you can spend your time doing more of what matters. Let's get right to the interview with today's guest, Amelia McGee and Grace Gudenkoff. Hey, Grace. Hey, Amelia. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Thanks, Chad. We're super excited to be here. Thank you for having us on.
Excited to have you. Congratulations on your new book. We're going to talk all about it today. And as a fellow author, I know how that process goes, and it's a doozy. It's a lot of work. But your topic in particular is awesome. I love it. And I actually interviewed my audience recently to find out. I was just curious about how many people who listen to this podcast, who watch my YouTube channel, are self-management versus hiring managers versus a mix of those. Do you guys have a guess what that would be? What would be your guess?
Ooh, that's a good poll. We should really run that on ours.
I'm going to say 70% self-manage.
Okay. What do you think, Grace?
I think less.
It was actually a good guess because I was shocked by this. I thought it would be like 50-50 maybe or somewhere in there. But so we have 50 to 60%, depending on which platform I was on, self-manage 100%. And then if you include people who have a mix of self-management and third-party managers, which I do as well, then you get up to 70 to 80% of my audience. So 20 to 30% hire managers exclusively. The rest of them need exactly what you're talking about in your book. And so I think this is such a relevant topic. And I'd love just to talk to both of you about why so many people are doing this and need this information. But why did you go the route of managing yourself, DIY investing, and what was that like in the beginning?
Yeah, so for me, I started as a DIY landlord self-manager because I needed every single penny to stay in my pocket. And I was willing to be scrappy and put in the extra legwork to make that happen. Because my ultimate goal when I started investing was to quit my job as soon as possible. So like I said, I needed every single cent in my pocket. Plus, I invest in some smaller markets where there aren't even options for property managers. So I was kind of forced into that role anyways.
Yeah, same exact way of how I got it started, but I actually was really excited to hire it out. But I bought this 8-unit from a professional company that everybody raved about. And I added so much value as a self-manager watching what the people who managed that 8-unit did wrong. And I was like, holy crap, they're supposed to be this professional company. They've got cars sitting in the driveway blocking people that haven't moved in 6 months. They're not charging the pent rent that's in their lease. I'm like, wait a second. If they can't even do this right, I'm not hiring. And they're the people everybody talks about in town. I'm not hiring this out.
Yeah. Got it. So as often does, like a bad experience or just like a wake up call experience says, I could do this, or I need to do this. In your case, Amelia, I just need to make the money. So that motivated you early on just to get started with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I also felt like I was going to have a lot more control over the property, which I think a lot of investors can be a bit of control freaks, at least when starting out. So I think that was another factor for me.
Yeah, I like that. I remember the advice, when I first started, like the general business advice was always like, if you're going to start a store, like learn to sweep the floors first, like learn to do everything. And I feel like not everybody needs to manage, but I think that's such good advice that if you're going to be a real estate investor, even if you want to outsource it eventually, which I have a lot of my properties, the best thing I did was actually doing the work, because then you actually know, to your point, Grace, that you know what should be done, you know what should be included in the lease, you know what a good job looks like or a bad job, either way. And then when you finally hire people out, which I want to talk about later when you do outsource, but yeah, so your case is just like me. I got started self-managing. What were the types of properties that you invested in then, and what does your portfolio look like now?
We both started very similar, small town Iowa. I have a lot more single family than Amelia does, but I have mostly single family and some duplexes and some quadplexes.
Yeah, and I started right away with small multi. So I'm mainly focused on small multi. I have 41 units and only I think 4 of them are single family homes. So I jumped right in. And fun fact, I find that self managing multifamily does come with a little bit more. There's more difficulties that come up when you're managing small multi because you have to deal with tenant conflicts and coordinating different things between units. And so I just jumped right in with that and was a super great learning experience. And I'm of the same mindset, Chad. I really feel like it's important to do it yourself at least once because even if you hire a property management company, you still have to manage the property management company. You still have to understand what's going on behind the scenes because it's your business after all. And okay, sorry, a little bit of ramble, but one last thing is I feel like you shouldn't immediately be looking to outsource the biggest make or break for your real estate business right when you buy a property. Like management is so huge, placing the right kind of tenant, collecting rent, that truly will make or break your rental portfolio.
100% agree. Yeah, I remember learning the hard way one time that the property manager decides who screens your tenants and how they screen them, and ultimately I started giving them my tenant screening criteria. Speaking of managing the manager, but early on, I don't think I would have known that. I think I would have just abdicated and say, "Oh, you know what you're doing. Like just screen the tenant." And maybe, do you have any experience or stories from people who've had bad experiences with that, where they didn't necessarily use the criteria they wanted, and that kind of led to a bad outcome for their rental property?
That's a common sentiment is I'm going to dump it on the manager's doorstep and then it's truly passive income. 2 months in, you're like, oh crap. I actually have to low key tell the property manager how to do their job because it's been sitting empty for 2 months and I'm now paying them for nothing. And so a lot of people are surprised to know that you don't just get to dump it and be, hands off. You still have to manage the third party when it comes to vacancies and turnovers and evictions and repairs and all of that stuff. So why the heck are you paying a middleman to do that when you could just do it yourself? And I think there are certain exceptions when people shouldn't self-manage, but for the most part, it's a great option for everybody. But your question of, do we hear a lot of these stories? I think the better question is, how many stories do you hear about people who love their property manager?
Like not as many. Yeah, it's a rare one. I actually I do love my two property managers. I'll give a plug for that. But it is so rare because everybody I talk to is like, how did that happen? Like, and part of this is like how do you give somebody relationship advice and say, how do you find the right person? It's like, well, it just you need to take some time and take some mistakes and take some wrong relationships. But yeah, I agree with you. But I do think me being a self-managed landlord helped me hire the right manager. So if people do want to do that, I think what we're going to be talking about here, which I love the frame you're both using of owning a business as opposed to just having this landlording side gig that you do on the side. So maybe you could talk about that. And Grace, or what does it mean to be a business owner of rental properties as opposed to just having some rental properties?
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, there's been a 180-degree shift in both Amelia and I's business in the last couple of years. And I think a business owner invests in the time and energy to create the systems and processes and procedures to look at it like a business, not a side hustle. It can be a side hustle, and it was for both of us when we first started, but you have to look at it as a business, as an investment. And a great example that I give is if you just try to do as little as possible to make the most money. Let's say you set a tenant, you don't write anything down, you place a tenant and they stay there for 10 years. Well, then when that tenant leaves, you have no systems or processes because you're like, that's too much work. I only have one rental. That doesn't make sense to write this out. You start completely over at ground zero because now it's been 10 years. There's no way in heck you remember how to screen and find a tenant. So now you got to relearn everything. Whereas if you just would have written down like a 1 or 2 sheeter of this is where I listed in my criteria and this is what I did, you wouldn't have to start over. So it's as simple as that, even if you have one unit.
Also, just taking on the role of like a CEO in your real estate business means that you should be looking over the financials every single month. You should be looking for ways to improve your properties. You should be looking for ways to increase your income without necessarily buying more properties. Instead of being in the day to day of stumbling over issues that arise with tenant management, because you've been able to systemize that portion of the business so well that you can really put on your CEO hat and look at it from a very, zoomed out point of view. That's what we have started to move into at this point.
Yeah, I love it. You're speaking my language. But a couple things I'm hearing there that I want to dig into. One, the role of being the financial manager, of just thinking about the finances of your business. One, building these systems and operations. And in both cases, it sounds like they allow you, even if you're self-managing, if you have systems and checklists, you can operate it and do the things better. You can do the tenant screening better. You can do your maintenance better, even if you're doing it 100% yourself. But then the side benefit, which I found for myself, is that you can eventually outsource that if you want, because it's a lot easier to hand a checklist to somebody than saying, hey, start screening tenants for me, or whatever. So let's talk about the finances first and foremost, because I know that's on everybody's mind. And Amelia, you mentioned when you first started self-managing, you had to do it because you just needed to make the cash flow. So could you talk about what are some of the main metrics you look at as the business owner for your rental property? Like what is key indicators or the main formulas, things that kind of move the boat for you as a CEO?
Yeah. So cash flow, obviously, look at that every single month. So what is my true bottom dollar at the end of the day? Not what I've made up in my head that I think it's going to be, but, oh, I forgot about that pest control. And, oh, I forgot about that $150 snow removal. Look, like actually having everything written down every single month. We both use QuickBooks at this point, having it in QuickBooks, taking a look at it, and making decisions based off of that. That's what's huge, is like being able to take action off of the data that you're consuming. Another one that's huge for me is my ROI, my return on investment. That's more of like when I'm running the numbers when I'm about to buy. But then I also look at my return on equity, which is a newer thing for me. But it's basically like, how hard is my money working for me that I already have invested in my properties? If I have a property that has a ton of equity, but maybe isn't cash flowing super well, is there a way that I can maybe pull that equity out in a line of credit and reuse it somewhere else? So those are kind of the main metrics that I've been looking at recently.
Something I realized when I got to be more proactive is like, hey, I think I'm charging actually too much rent to where people aren't staying for more than a year, and I'm eating so much in turnover. But I thought I was making premium rent and I had it made, when in reality, when I have a second to actually sit down, look over the numbers and dig into it, I need to maybe drop my rent a little bit more and keep good tenants for a long time.
Yeah, I love this conversation because when I talk about bookkeeping, and I'm a bookkeeping nerd, maybe it sounds like you have some of the same qualities, but every time I talk about it, people's eyes kind of glaze over. They're like, oh man. And so I always tell the story, like, remember the Matrix, the movie The Matrix? Neo like saw the entire world in like zeros and ones. Like, that's what this is. It's because you can make decisions like Grace, you just did, because you can make these business decisions where you can see your business with one little number that says, wait a minute, like maybe I should lower my rent because I'm really not making as much profit. So I'm curious for you guys, just how do you actually, just like nuts and bolts of tracking your finances? You mentioned you use QuickBooks. Like, do you have some processes on a monthly basis that you look at with your bank accounts? Like, maybe you could just talk to that just for the kind of nitty gritty type way of tracking this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start by saying I didn't do this for an entire year, and I bought like 20 units and like 10 rehabs. And then I had to go retroactively hire a bookkeeper. And now that my QuickBooks are nice and pretty, I can pinpoint that it cost me $8,500 to catch up my bookkeeping. So don't make this mistake. But now that I've learned from that, I have a very, I'd say, pretty strict weekly and monthly routine. Monthly, I'm looking at all of my transactions. I have a VA bookkeeper. I'm going to look at ask my accountant to see what do they have questions about. Then I'm going to look at my profit and loss and my balance sheet by property. And I'm going to go through, and I have this template, and it has on the column, it has all my properties, and the row, it says profit and loss or balance sheet. And I look and I make notes. I'm like, wow, that utility bill was huge. What's going on? Or, wow, I cash flowed negative $200. I thought this was a great property in my head. Do I need to sell it? Another thing I'm trying to start doing is relating this back to my quarterly goals now of cash flow and equity. And another thing that I do every week is, this has been so helpful as a self-manager, is I only pay bills once a week. On Tuesdays, all my contractors know I pay bills on Tuesdays. If you email me or text me, I will say, can I pay this Tuesday? And it has been a huge stress reliever. I have a nice little pile on my desk right here and a little category in my inbox where I save all my virtual bills, and I pay them one time, and it makes sure that I don't ever forget any receipts. As I move them into my receipts folder, I don't forget bills, and it just clears up all the clutter in my head that's happening throughout the week.
Yeah. But it sounds like we're really organized. I'm just like listening to this and I'm like, if you're hearing this, we were not always this way. Oh my gosh, we are not perfect by any means.
We were running wild in Iowa.
We were a mess for like the first year because we just had so much momentum, and we both purchased a lot of properties within our first 2 years just by being scrappy. And then we were like, oh crap, we're in over our heads because we didn't create any processes along the way. So you can get there too, because we did not start out this way.
I'll join that party because I've been in the same boat as well. And Grace, I resonated with that. We spent probably not only like CPA time, but also just hours and hours and hours of our personal time digging, like just headaches of going down rabbit holes. Like, what was that? Did we categorize that right? I mean, it is a nightmare trying to undo bad books for the last 2 years. So I think this is just one of those things. If you can get a simple system early on, it doesn't have to be complicated. And I let get your book, because your book has some really good checklists and some systems and some processes for this and a lot of other things. But this is one of those that you can avoid pain if you can, because I've been there as well. But I've heard, I think all of us, it's a little natural when you grow, it's messy, and you don't know what you don't know. So I was the same way. I bought a bunch of properties, and then it's like you make this big meal, and it's beautiful and it's tasty, but then you got to clean the kitchen up for the next 2 or 3 hours until you can go back and make the next meal, right?
Yeah. And I think that's what's fun about the book is we go in all these stories about like, yeah, we did accomplish a lot, but it was crazy. And here's all the things we did wrong, so you don't have to. And furthermore, here's a blueprint to start your systems and processes and get organized, even if you have just one property, so that you can scale with peace of mind and not have to stop and halt like Amelia did and say, hold up, we got to really figure some stuff out before we can continue forward.
Yep, 100%. Well, if you're okay with that, I want to keep nerding out on systems because this stuff is helpful, and I know people will eat it up. You had this idea in the book called quick guides, and it's essentially the way I understood it was like having a collection of checklists or lists. And I'll let you explain. I want you to unpack what this is. I think it's a really cool idea. As if we're into the mode of getting organized and organizing our self-management business, let's talk about quick guides and what that is.
Yeah, I love it. I have a big smile on my face because this is fun. Well, let me tell you what I used to do. I had like 15 midterm rentals, and to get the Wi-Fi password, it might be written down. It might be in my text messages with my Wi-Fi installer. Maybe I emailed it to myself. Maybe I texted it to the tenant. I had no idea. I did not have centralized information. So what I had to do is retroactively create all these quick guides for any piece of information I needed in my business. So it's just an Excel spreadsheet that's super organized and visual and lays out all the information that you need to quickly access. For example, insurance policies, utility numbers, Wi-Fi passwords, bank account numbers, door codes. Those are huge ones that I now have a checklist. Like when I get a property or rent a property, in that checklist, it says, go fill out this quick guide. So I know at all times my quick guides are up to date and have all the information. And so like I just went back to Iowa last week and I was walking a bunch of properties because I'm not physically where my portfolio is. I just needed one Excel spreadsheet to get me into every single property because every door code was listed there. I didn't have to search through my text messages or call somebody. It's all nice and pretty in this quick guide.
Grace taught me about quick guides, so I don't have anything to add to that.
It's like so simple, but so powerful if you just commit to it.
It's one of those ideas that it seems so simple on the surface, but man, if you can, for the locks and the lock codes, and then, but the utility accounts, I could think about like when I hired a bookkeeper, for example, having a list of here's all our utility companies, here's what we do. It just saves you time and headache and energy, whether it's you doing it or someone else. It's this mindset of being list oriented and organized that makes such a big difference.
And another thing with the quick guides is what Amelia and I are really big on is source of truth. There's only one. If you do a quick guide and you do 2 of them, now it's invalid because you have the information in 2 spots, which is correct. The quick guide is all about making one source of truth that is the answer with a capital T about whatever it is you're trying to find.
Very good. All right. So people are going to be getting their books organized. That's one thing. They're going to be hiring bookkeepers, perhaps getting QuickBooks. They're also going to be making some quick guides, there's a lot of examples in the book. I want to talk about one of the most important systems for a self-managing landlord, which is your relationship with your tenants and working with your tenants. And so maybe we can unpack this a little bit and we'll be able to learn some of your standard operating procedures and how you do this. But I guess talk to me about your philosophy of being a self-managing landlord and your relationship with your tenants and how you look at that.
This is such a good question, such a good topic, because I think it's often forgotten when we talk about investing in real estate, is that this business is customer service based and your customer is your tenant. And your goal with being a landlord should be to provide the most excellent customer service to those really well-paying tenants. The biggest cash flow killer in real estate is vacancy. So you want to keep your tenants happy. Obviously, we don't want you to bend over backwards and, honor every single request, but you should be treating them with respect and dignity while also keeping a very professional relationship with them. I know that it's hard to, it's easy to like cross that line and become friendly, but then when stuff comes up, it's harder to, put your foot down. But we're firm believers in being great landlords and ethical landlords, and we try to treat our tenants with the most respect possible.
And not only is it the right thing to do, but even if you if you had a purely financial incentive, having tenants who stay for 5-10 years, who refer their friends to you, is not only the right thing to do, it's also a really good business decision as well.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about finding those great tenants. And then I want to talk about customer service whenever you actually had your tenant in there. So maybe you could walk us through, if you were a brand new landlord and you happened to like stumble upon your book and you're reading your standard operating procedure, like what would it look like to go from, I've got this house vacant and now I want to like start moving towards having my tenant? What would some of the main steps be from there?
Number one, you're going to obviously market your rental, but a lot of times people forget that there are steps you need to do before marketing. Again, another quick guide, another process I have is writing down every serial number to all the appliances in there so that I can give great customer service when there's future maintenance requests because I already know what I'm servicing. So you need to be cleaning it before a tenant moves in, keeping track of everything that's in the property, making sure that everything's up to snuff and ready to go so that when they do move in, they're happy and it's a seamless transition. When you're marketing it, in our markets, we're in a smaller area. Facebook Marketplace goes a long, long way where we're at. So we market on Facebook Marketplace, Facebook groups, Zillow, for rent signs. And then another thing Amelia and I are both doing a little bit differently moving forward is actually making sure that when we do have people walking through, they're pre-qualified. And after we decide to move forward with the tenant, that we sign the lease in person so we can proactively set expectations and boundaries and go through the lease and make sure that everybody has the same expectation and knows exactly how this is going to work.
The good old rent talk, right? So I heard somebody call that the lease talk or the rent talk. To have that, it's easy to gloss over that. I've done it a lot where I just send them the lease and hey, just sign here, but you're missing a big opportunity to have a relationship and set some expectations as well.
Yeah, I used to think like, the little I can do, the least I can do, make it easy as possible. I'll just e-sign it so that it's super easy. And now it's like, no, let's really go through everything and do the brunt work up front so that it can be seamless for the next 3 years while you're living here.
Yeah, and Grace and I have actually both transitioned. I know this is a lot about self-managing, but we've both taken kind of a third route and we've hired internal property managers. So this has allowed us to really do those extra things that make our business operate better because again, we're not running around fighting fires. We're able to be proactive managers. So yeah, like Grace said, that includes signing leases in person, taking pre-applications before the like actual paid application so we can make sure we're not wasting our time showing the unit to tenants who don't even qualify. Just things like that that make us better business owners.
Love it. Well, I want to go into the transition point in just a moment about how do you go from being purely self-managed to actually outsourcing it maybe with a third-party internal person, which I love that conversation. In terms of like screening, I had a question you brought up of qualifying. This is a big topic, not only from a business standpoint, also from a legal standpoint. What are some of the most important things you look for that qualify somebody to be a good tenant for you?
Yeah, the two biggest key indicators for me are credit score because that's I mean that shows how likely someone is to pay their debts, pay what they owe. And the second is landlord references. And I want to go a little bit deeper into that because you need to do some due diligence on your end when you're checking landlord references because people will lie. People will put their friends, people will put, their mom and dad, and you need to verify that that person was the previous landlord or owner of whatever address they listed for that person. And one other thing that I want to say as far as screening goes, when we list our properties, we're trying to fend off any questions before they even happen. So we list all of our requirements in the listing. So minimum credit score, whether or not we accept pets, the common questions that are going to come up, we have proactively listed those so people can see ahead of time whether or not they're even qualified.
It's a great idea. It saves the prospect time. It saves you time. I started doing that too, and it took a long time for me to do it. I'm like, why did it take me so long to come to this idea? That's such a brilliant, screening mechanism. But good little tidbit there. I hope people run with that one for sure.
Obviously, communication and how the tenant communicates with you while they're a prospect and while they're trying to make this happen is something that I very much take into account. And that's harder to put into a process or, put a number on. But I think another great thing about self-managing is, your gut a lot of the times is accurate, and we don't want to run our business only off gut, but it is nice to have a little bit of a chance in there to, feel somebody out. And that's why we do the pre-qualification as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think part of, we are screening for character and a willingness to pay, responsibility. And so if you just delay a little, if you get a bad feeling about something, I always notice banks do this. They stall the application process a little bit. They say, hey, like, please do this step or do this extra step. You forgot this paperwork. And if somebody does it on time and they're diligent, and you can tell when somebody's on top of it. Okay, this person's amazing. Whereas somebody's like, it's always having to ask them 3 times. You're always having to like bug them about it. They're complaining about everything from the very beginning. It's like, all right, wait a minute. Like, this is not getting started right. That's when you want to slow things down, stall it a little bit, see if you can verify what's going on.
We talk more about that in the book, like how to handle difficult situations or some red flags that people might show when they're applying for something. So we are big on that in accordance with fair housing laws, of course.
Yeah. And you can't do that. You don't have to. That's a lot of people. If you're not in the landlording world, you don't realize you can be 100% legal, 100% fair, and also do the best thing for both parties. I mean, there is a way to do that.
Absolutely.
All right. I love this. I love the details, the tenant screening, the kind of filtering up front. You find a good tenant, you get an application. I know one of the systems that a lot of new landlords are intimidated by is just some of the paperwork, like the leases and, how do you do this stuff? If you're not in real estate, you don't realize how much paperwork and how many contracts there are. How did you early on deal with that side of things? Just getting a lease that you're going to use and understanding that lease. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
This is crazy to say, and nobody ever wants to do it, but sitting down and reading the entire lease will tell you everything. The other day, my friend was asking a bunch of questions about her apartment. And I said, just read your lease. It's in your lease. Like, I remember when I was in college renting, I would do anything to figure something out, but read my lease. But getting started, that is the number one resource that you can use to figure out how the heck this is happening. Because your lease is going to tell you everything you need to look out for, everything you need to pre-communicate with your tenant so that they're not surprised when you tell them, hey, you absolutely cannot burn candles in this apartment or whatever. Or, hey, you cannot just move a friend in because of X, Y, and Z. And I would highly recommend, if you have the means, to get a lease from a local attorney. Because if you just get a lease from, somewhere off the internet, you don't know, because you're not an attorney or an expert when you're first started, if there's things in that lease that, are illegal or don't apply in your state, or if you're missing things.
Yeah, and I like the idea of taking a lease that you did find from a friend, and then sitting down and paying an attorney their time for an hour and saying, "Hey, I want to do a lease review.
Yes.
This worked for my friend; they really like it." But then, you're in Iowa, I'm in South Carolina. Maybe there's a landlord tenant law that is like, you can't do that here in Iowa, and your attorney would then. I guess it's a good use of time, because you're not. If you start from scratch, they might be able to draft one for you, but are they really going to be the best landlord lease for you? So yeah, I like taking an agreement that maybe you get from Bigger Pockets, that you get from somewhere else, and then don't be a cheap landlord and just not pay that attorney. Like, pay that attorney, because you're going to be using this lease like dozens and hundreds of times for the next decades. So that's a good money, good investment.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of money up front when you keep adding on all of these things. And you're like, man, I really want to cut corners. I want to save money, but it's so worth it, especially in terms of your lease specifically, to pay someone to look it over, because Chad, like you said, you're going to reuse that so many times anyways, that your return on investment for paying somebody one time and maybe once every 5 years to review it is totally worth it.
100%. All right, so we've made it through the marketing. We got the property ready. We followed our checklist there, our quick guides. We've got the property. We found a tenant who meets our criteria. We signed the lease. Let's talk about onboarding. This seems like another thing that's not that big a deal, but I have found it to be a huge deal, and I know you emphasize that in the book. Talk to me about your onboarding system for when a new tenant is moving in.
Yeah. So first and foremost, we're moving into signing that lease in person. So when we sign that lease in person, we're also doing a walkthrough of the property and documenting any damages or anything that's gone wrong. And we never used to do this because, again, we were of the mindset, like, don't poke the bear, just make it as easy as possible. And we weren't setting up ourselves for success in that way. So sign the lease, you do the walkthrough. They should get settled in. After a week, we do a 1 week check-in. Hey, is everything still going well? Again, that just goes back to providing great customer service. And one point that we haven't touched on yet is the use of a property management software. That's huge for both of us. We both use Tenant Cloud, but there's hundreds of options out there. We just really like what Tenant Cloud has to offer, specifically their maintenance request system and some other things like that. But and then we take all of our communication with our tenants, and it's on Tenant Cloud. So after that first initial in-person walkthrough, we don't even give them our phone number anymore, which I think is a little bit controversial, but all communication going forward happens through Tenant Cloud. And hopefully, if these are long-term tenants, you don't hear from them very often. But yeah, that's kind of our onboarding process. It's fairly simple, I would say.
What do you tell them about, so in that lease talk and the onboarding, if they do have a problem, because maintenance is one of those things that everybody gets scared about as a self-managing landlord. What do you tell them as the procedure if they do have a problem? Do they have a website they go to? They report it there? What's that process like?
They report it in Tenant Cloud, and we always present this as a benefit to them. Hey, we can't take texts, we can't take phone calls or emails about maintenance requests because we might not get back to you because we're, disorganized or whatever. If you put it in Tenant Cloud, that's the best way for us to see it, stay organized, close out the request when it's finished. So we really just present that as a benefit to them. But yeah, they're submitting all of their requests in Tenant Cloud, and they also have to submit videos and photos. That's really important because we're trying to problem solve issues before we have to move to sending out a maintenance person, which happens more often than you think. You can a lot of times just troubleshoot right with the tenant, especially if they provide those, the pictures and the documentation that you need.
That's another quick guide I have, a troubleshooting quick guide of all the quirks of all my properties so that when somebody says the TV isn't working, I know, nope, it's because that outlet is on a switch. I'm not sending somebody out there. Just flip the switch.
Yeah, these are going back to your conversation about what can you do when you're working on your business as the CEO, like these kind of things, like these quick guides, or I'm thinking about some of my own properties that I do not have a list of all the appliances, and I do not have a list of like, oh, here's the quirk, here's a shut off valve if the water is going everywhere. Like, if you just did an audit of your own business and said, how can I improve this a little bit this month, a little bit more next month? I mean, that's these kind of tips are awesome, because ultimately they're going to lead to you being more passive. They're more peace of mind, fewer headaches, fewer emergencies. And all it takes is a little bit of proactivity and, consistency.
And you need to train your tenants and you need to train yourself. And here's another good example of why we make sure that everybody is communicating in Tenant Cloud. Because I now have a property manager who works for me. He's on my salary. He's on my payroll. And I have a maintenance guy who works completely for me. It's my dad. So Ethan, my property manager, was texting a tenant outside of Tenant Cloud about an issue, and then he left town and I had to come in and take over on that issue and try to get it solved. Well, when I went to message her in Tenant Cloud, her phone number was no longer the valid phone number because she was not trained to use it. She was trained to, I call, I text. Well, then when somebody's out of town, I can't see the communication that's happened. I don't know what's been said. So I send somebody, it was like the day after Christmas, HVAC is out, an emergency. I send people out, they're at her door at 8 a.m. knocking and she's not answering because she didn't get any of my communication because she wasn't using Tenant Cloud. So that's a great example of how everybody needs to be on the same page, doing the same thing, systemized the same way. And that is a real benefit for the tenant. I can't fix your maintenance request if you're not using my systems.
To them. And yeah, we're so huge on that, and we're so huge on setting boundaries and then sticking to those boundaries because they don't do any good if you're not going to enforce them. So if we do have someone message us outside of Tenant Cloud, we always just say, hey, I'm going to put the response to this question in Tenant Cloud. Please use Tenant Cloud moving forward. That is how I communicate with my tenants.
Very good advice. And so you've mentioned a couple of tech issues. I want to talk tech, and I want to go then talk about outsourcing. And so you've mentioned QuickBooks, which I'm going to put a link to, which I'm a big QuickBooks fan as well. You've mentioned Tenant Cloud, which is the property management software. Are there any other kind of high level, you have a whole list in the book of like an exhaustive list of a bunch of different apps you use, which is cool. Are there any, 2 or 3 others that come to mind that are sort of indispensable for you in today's high tech world to be a self-managing landlord?
Oh yeah, we're big Monday users for both our women invest in real estate business and our own personal business, real estate businesses. But Monday is basically a project manager, and that's where I store all of my checklists for my SOPs so that I can assign people to them, give it a date, and put updates in there. And that's basically how I have like my working checklist for everything. I could talk about Monday all day long. I won't. Another huge thing, I don't know if I said this in the book, but like LastPass for password sharing when you go to eventually hire out. It's a safe way to share passwords. We love our QuickBooks. Another option for QuickBooks is Stessa if you don't want to pay for it, but we really recommend QuickBooks. What else am I forgetting, Amelia?
The only other one that I would say is super instrumental in my investing business, specifically because I have a lot of midterm rentals, is Hospitable. So Hospitable is what I use for calendar management, cleaner messaging, and just auto reminders to myself when I have tenant turnovers and things like that. So that is huge for my business.
You brought up something about midterm rentals versus long-term rentals. And I didn't ask you this earlier, but is there any advice you give that's different for people who want to self-manage short-term rentals versus midterm rentals versus long-term rentals? Or is some of this pretty general and apply to all of those?
I think it's pretty applicable to all. I mean, there are some tweaks, especially because with, midterm and short term, it's a lot more review based. So you have to be even more customer service oriented in those roles. And there are some different tech stacks that you're going to need to help you manage those. But overall, I feel like the concept of self-managing applies to any strategy that you utilize.
And so the other thing that applies is if you start off sweeping the floors of your own shop and you do these things yourself, you build your systems at some point, and I'll plug part of my book that I wrote. In the Small and Mighty Investor, I talked about how we all go through this journey where you begin as a starter investor, the scrappy, just get the deal and house hack and just get a couple deals under your belt. And then you move to this builder phase where you have this messy, I'm just going to grow and refinance and bird deals. But then ultimately you get to different plateaus along the way where you actually want to do what it is you set out to do in the first place, which is that freedom and time and flexibility. It sounds like you both kind of transitioned into that, harvester phase is what I like to call it, or, some people call it like an ender phase. So I want to talk about that because, at some point you may want to outsource. I have a mentor named John Schaub who is still doing self-management 50 years later. So like it doesn't have to happen, but I have outsourced a lot of my own, especially my student rentals, which are more intensive. Sounds like you have done that as well. So I want to ask, when is a good time, or maybe you can just tell your own story. Like, when did you know that it was time for you to start hiring someone else? And why did you decide to hire somebody internally instead of going to a third-party property manager?
Yeah, just like the byline of our book, because you're going to get more profit, time, and peace of mind if you do it yourself. I really do not believe in big management companies, and the ones who are good, like you said, you love yours. Well, word gets around that they're great, and then usually they get overwhelmed anyways, and then can't keep up with the quality that they've previously given. But in my case specifically, I reverse engineered it. I wanted to start flipping. And so I looked up the property management salaries in my area. Well, first I started by hiring somebody for 10 hours a week at $20 an hour. And I was like, if they can just do all the coordination and the lease signing so that I can focus on different things, that'd be awesome. They did that for a year. She was amazing. She had a full-time job. We parted ways, and I replaced that person with a full-time property and project manager. When I did that, I divided their salary by how many flips I would have to do to pay for them. And knowing that I get plus 40 hours a week in my week by hiring this person, can I do that? It was a no-brainer answer. It was like 2 mediocre flips to pay for this person. And he did his first flip. We did our first flip together in it was 65, 70 days flat. And I was like, okay, wow, I made a great decision. And it really helped me step up to the CEO, really think about what business I wanted to run, what different things I wanted to do, and really improve the quality that my tenants were getting, my contractors were getting, and anybody who works with me.
I was just going to say mine was much more emotion-based. I just got to a point where I really did not enjoy self-managing anymore, and I knew my time was better spent elsewhere. And I'm not someone that wants to work all the time. I have a lot of hobbies. I like playing sports. I like doing all the things. So I wanted to enjoy that. And answering tenant messages and maintenance requests and all of that was just not bringing me joy anymore. And so I finally was just I have to hire this out at this point.
So it's like a season of your life, and it might be an emotional season. It might be a business season of your life, but there's these transition points that you both hit. I've hit the same thing, but I want to talk about the financial side of that, because you mentioned, Grace, replacing the cost. So I'm thinking, I don't know if these are the real numbers, but I'm thinking in my area that I might be able to hire someone full-time in this kind of role for 50 grand a year, let's say. And so you might be thinking, all right, I'm making 50,000 for my rentals right now and cash flow, and I've been building up to get to that point. And so I'm living off that 50,000 bucks. And for me to pay somebody else, now I'm not going to have the money. So did you think about it like that? All right, I'm going to go flip over here and make 25,000 per house, make 50,000 bucks. That's going to be my money that I'm going to live off of or use to supplement. And then I'll have the rentals will still keep growing and having, the rent will get bigger over time, but they're going to kind of be self-sustaining with this one person. Is that the math that you sort of thought about it like?
Yeah, that's exactly how I thought about it. How do I add income streams to now make this person, quote unquote, free for me? As in, I'm not dropping my income. I'm actually using this person to make more income and pay for themselves. How do I get them to pay for themselves? And so for me, flipping was that answer. Most people flip first and then they start to keep rental properties. Amelia and I kept everything the first few years. And then now I'm starting to getting into flipping because I have 2 employees. And it was a huge peace of mind because I got to hire somebody who was going to follow my checklist, Whereas I'm not necessarily going to follow my checklist because I don't have anybody bossing me around. Do a great job, show up, be there in person, be motivated. And I actually was able to grow my income and their income at the same time.
So it's an investment. Literally, like you look at a rental property.
It was literally an investment.
You have an asset.
Yeah.
This is a person is even better. I found the same thing. Like human beings are, if we can invest in those people and their relationships, like, man, what an amazing, not only like emotional reward because you get this team and this person who you get to work with, but also you both financially benefit. There's literally a return on investment.
Yeah. And it was exciting because I got to up his salary from his previous job. I got to get into flips, which I wouldn't have done by myself. I could do like 1 or 2 projects at a time with myself, but with him, I think we have like 4 or 5 right now. And it just has increased the quality of life every which way. But that's according to my goals. If you are somebody who just wants to be completely passive, then you would need to build your rental portfolio up to a spot where you can then give up some of that cash flow to be completely hands-free.
Which is more the route I went. I can think about when in 2017, my wife and kids and I went to Ecuador, and my number was like $3,000 a month is what I wanted to net after paying everything. And we hired both an internal property manager for part of our portfolio because we had about 100 units. Part of our portfolio was the internal property manager who used to be a bookkeeper, and she kind of grew into that role. And then the other, we acquired this big new multi-unit property, and that was a third-party manager, and they managed that part. But my goals were I had to make enough cash flow paying 100% to all these people and having enough cash flow. And that was when I knew I was like, okay, financially independent, we're good to go. And, but you can do both. Like you can do, I love how you could do this earlier. If you just say, I'm going to basically pay somebody the cash flow for my rental business, and then I'm going to go make some money over here doing something else, which could be flipping. It could be back to your normal job. I mean, there's lots of ways to think about that, but it's such a smart in different ways. Some people, they think about it's leverage. It's not expense. This is literally an investment that you're going to get back.
Not even including the non-monetary benefits that you get from it because you're now able to be the CEO and you can run your business so much better. So you probably do end up making more money anyways, just because there's all those little things that you don't think make you money, like keeping your tenants for more years than just one, and cutting down on the time between turnovers because you have someone on it right away. Like all that little stuff adds up.
So another financial question, I'm sure you've analyzed this, but if you look at hiring somebody like that and basically being an employee or a contractor for you versus hiring and just paying a property manager 10%, have you seen that to be a net profit for you? Was it more profitable for you to hire your own person compared to hiring the third party manager?
Yeah, I pay my internal property manager $500 a month. She manages all 41 of my doors, which are a combination of long-term, short-term, and midterm. If I was paying 10% or more, because they're midterm and short-term as well, to a property management company, I would be looking at paying them thousands of dollars every month. So I save so much money. She gets to learn. She's a younger investor that has a few doors herself, and she also gets to mentor under me, which I think is a great benefit to her as well. And she gets to learn the ropes from an investor who's a little bit more advanced than she is.
Mm-hmm. In my portfolio, when I first hired the 10 hours, it was $800 a month. And at the time, if I would have used 10%, it would have been $3,000. So I saved over $2,000 just by, and I still, like Amelia said, got the better quality and got direct access rather than being one of 100 clients at a bigger management company.
Yeah, so you have the quality control, and it's also kind of cool that you can do it in pieces. Like it sounds like, I did the same thing. We hired a bookkeeper 10 hours a week, and she checked our mail, she did our bills, if we had late rent, she would call the people who are late on rent. So it's kind of nice that you can like turn the volume up and down in terms of getting help on a few things, or maybe if you want to go all in, or I'm even thinking of my own. I've always told my business partners, like, hey, if things get really bad, like which thing are we going to take back over first? We're going to take over that and that. And I'm not that handy, but if I had to learn heating and air and electricity, like if it was in a disastrous situation, we pay $150,000 a year in maintenance to contractors, and I'm like, I'm happy about that, but that's a lot of meat on that bone that, we have a lot of industries that are making money because of us.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an internal maintenance crew?
We don't. We still, and I'm 3/4 of our property. Well, let's say 80% of our properties are third party managers. So we lean on their contractor pool. When we self manage it, most of it ourselves, though, we had contractors who were handymen and electricians and plumbers who were just, we were one of their top clients. So they would move pretty quickly and help us out a lot, but we've never had an internal crew. I've considered that, but it is the math didn't, for the small and mighty investor, it was always like you'd have to get big enough. And this is what property management companies find. They have to get up to like 100 units, 500 units, just to have the scale to be able to have one person on staff and afford to pay them well. So for me, it just never made economic sense.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that we didn't talk about. It's just the nature of the game with property management companies. Just like you said, they have to manage so many properties to make a profit, and that's why they usually are subpar, is because they just have too many doors that they're taking care of.
It's not easy to run a growing business that also has a bunch of moving parts. I mean, I don't envy them. It's really the good business owners in any business. There's always a 5% really good, 95% they're not that good. Realtors, property managers, electricians. So I think property management is just hard, and it's a good business in terms of like recurring cash flow, but it's not like a get rich kind of business to own either. So I think that's the other issue. So I do have one other emotional question. I know this has been a tough one for me, is that when you hire people, you're making that investment, and you might listen to us and say, oh yeah, Grace said it was a return on investment. That's good. But then when you emotionally have to like hand that money over and pay them up front, and that's the money you were using, and now you have to go like make the money. Like, can you speak to that? Because I think that's the entrepreneurial like challenge, is that the fear of like having to lose money and this person's depending on you is real.
Yeah, and that's why you can start in pieces of like doing 5 to, like you did, a bookkeeper, and then they add on your bills and your mail, and then they move into, a bigger role. So it's not all or nothing. And of course it is scary to hire somebody. That's why you also have to do your due diligence on them, and your due diligence within the security of your business, and understanding what are the risks for hiring somebody. What is the worst case scenario? We're both big fans of looking at the worst case scenario and saying, can I handle that? And if I can handle the worst case scenario, is it worth the risk? Then let's do it.
Yeah, and I would also say that there's a level of, obviously it's a huge responsibility to have someone on your team that's relying on you for an income, but it makes you I'm super competitive, so I like to push myself, but like it almost makes me perform better because I know somebody else is relying on me.
It's no longer just a little side hustle. Like, you need to step up and be smart with your time and be smart with your investments, because there are more people on the line here than just yourself.
Yep. I love it. The personal growth aspect, underrated for sure. So such a good point. Yeah. Well, Amelia, Grace, this has been awesome. I love nerding out on rental properties and maintenance and systems. Maybe not everybody else wants to do that, but I think we found 3 people here who do like doing that. I want to let you give a chance to talk about the book a little bit more, where people can find it. I know it's going to be coming out. By the time this episode comes out, it'll be available. So maybe you just give a plug about what the book's about and why they should check it out.
Yeah, it's called The Self-Managing Landlord, More Profit, Time, and Peace of Mind with DIY Rental Property Management. And we wrote it, like we said at the beginning, to show everybody a path forward for how to run a rental property business like a business. So the how-tos of rentals, plus the how-tos to be organized with systems and processes. And we give so many like behind the scenes stories of the things we did wrong and what we wish we would have done differently. So it's been so much fun to write. It's been great writing it with Amelia, because we got to do it together and be collaborative. But I mean, I think it's a pretty darn good book. What about you, Amelia?
Yeah, I agree. I actually, like, when we were in the throes of writing it, I was like, is this crap or is this good? And then like when we went through the editing process, I was like, wait, this is so good and going to be so helpful for so many people. And one thing that I really enjoy about the book is you can you can choose which chapters you read and which you skip. Like if you're a more advanced investor that knows how to onboard tenants, that knows the lease signing process, you don't have to read that section. But if you're like, man, I still haven't learned how to like get organized and do SOPs and set up a business credit card and like all of that, you can focus more on those chapters. So I really like that you can just pick and choose where you choose to invest your time in reading that book.
It is a good book. I read it as well. And as an author who, to me, the judge of a good book is it has to have enough stories to make it interesting and fun. And you definitely got a ton of those, not only your story, but a lot of other examples. But then you got to have the details and the nuts and bolts and the meat. And you got it. You got lots of checklists in there and you got lots of things you can, I always judge a book by like, man, you spend $20 on a book. And if you get one little system that you can then go make $100 or $1,000 or 10,000. I mean, real estate's a big return on investment business. So I'm 100%. I have a bookshelf in the background. You guys can see this. It's like always educating. And this is the topic that we never stop educating ourselves about, being landlords. I mean, this is something we've got to keep getting better. So thank you both for writing the book. Thanks for being here to talk. I'm going to put links to both of your, how people can connect with you, but maybe if you want to verbally tell people, where do you hang out online if people want to connect with you personally, and I'll put links to all that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So first of all, the book's being published by Bigger Pockets. That's where you can find it. I'm sure you'll link it in the show notes for people to buy, but I hang out on Instagram. That's really where you can find me. My handle is Amelia Jo REI. And one thing we didn't even talk about is Grace and I are huge proponents for women investing in real estate, which is why we have the company Wire, which is Women Invest in Real Estate. And we hang out on Instagram there too. So that's at wire with 2eyes.community. And we also have a private Facebook group. And we absolutely love that business. It's amazing. So check us out there if you're a female real estate investor.
Yes, or womeninvestinrealestate.com. And you can find me on Instagram at grace.investing.
Awesome. I'll have links to all of that. You're doing great work. You're doing great community. Thank you again for being here, and look forward to seeing you soon, probably at Bigger Pockets Con. That'll be the next time we'll see you in person.
Yep, we can't wait.
We'll be there.
All right. Awesome. Take care. In this episode, we talked about all the details of managing a rental property for yourself. But have you ever wondered, how many rentals will you actually need to have financial freedom, to retire, to do whatever you want to do with your life? Well, the next episode is one where I dig into the numbers of retirement and how to stack up cash flow and how many rentals you actually need to do that. Check it out. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll have a link above me here, or you can look at the podcast or YouTube description below.